Purim Sameach to everyone. Purim Sameach from the Gush. We should have Yeshua's for Nechamos. I'm recording this year about a week and a half before Purim. Today's Erev Rosh Chodesh Adar. Mirz Hashem, Lehudim HaSa'ariv, HaSimcha, V'sasan, V'yikar, V'nahpochu. Things should be inverted, or they should continue to be inverted, in this chaotic world in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu's divine hand is slowly crafting the end of days. Be'ezras Hashem. So this is a three-part series in which I want to explore various structural and literary elements of Megillat Esther. That means not just what the Psukim are telling us, but how they are styled, what the architecture is, which words and imageries and experiences serve as the scaffolding or the literary architecture of Megillat Esther, and how that teaches us messages of Megillat Esther. So in today's world, of course, a lot more attention placed on structure and on style and on word usage. And of course, the goal is to use these as tools to develop deeper ideas and to complement the ideas that we know about already in Megillat Esther. So the first year, we'll talk about the role of parties, what role parties play in Megillat Esther. The second year, we'll talk about the role of letters and language in Megillat Esther. And the third year, we'll discuss Mirz Hashem, that fateful night, and the role of night and day, and in particular, nighttime visitations and dreams and prophecies, or the absence of dreams and prophecies in Megillat Esther. So let's start with parties. Literally, Megillat Esther is a story of 10 parties. There are 2 parties which Achashverosh conducts, one for everyone in his kingdom and one for the people in Shushan. And believe me, Megillat Esther starts with a bang. These 2 parties are very loud, very embellished, very riotous, very raucous. Unfortunately, there's an undercurrent of sexuality. We'll talk about some of these. And Gam Vashti Amalka Asza Mishtei Nashim, she conducts her own party. So there are 3 parties right in the beginning in Perek Aleph. Now, when Esther is appointed and nominated, there's a 4th party surrounding Esther's selection. And then the 5th party, remember there are 10 prakim, 10 parties, not necessarily party per Perek, but 10 and 10. And the 5th party, which is halfway through Megillat Esther, is Haman and Achashvero's party. V'hamelech v'haman yashvu lishtos v'er Shushan navocha. So these are the parties that's in Perek Gimel of Megillat Esther. Now, after the tide turns, or as the tide is turning, and so much is happening in those middle prakim of Hey and Vav and Zayin, right? Aleph through Dalet is the setup, and Hey and Vav and Zayin is the transition, and Ches, Tes, and Yud are the culmination. So as the tide is turning, so Esther conducts 2 parties. She invites Haman and Achashverosh to the first party, El Mishtesh Hashem Machar, and she invites him to a second party. That's 2 after the tide turns. Then there is the party when the Gezerah is overturned. So the party that, when the letters are sent out, the celebration and gala, and then the 2 parties in the end in Perek Tes. The party on the 14th, all the cities across the empire and the kingdom that had warred and had battled on the 13th, and then the party on the 15th in Shushan, which had an extra day of warfare and an extra day of battle. So there are 10 parties, and right in the middle is the transition. So evidently, the parties are meant to convey a more profound, maybe somewhat camouflaged element of Megillat Esther. So we tend to read, rightly so, Megillat Esther as a historical book, as the face-off between Am Yisrael and Amalek, as Haman Hagagi, Tzara Yehudim, Meuzev Esahu, as a theological book to recognize the hidden hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even during a period of Hester Panim, as a restorative, redemptive book to return to the Beis HaMikdash, and these are true, and we'll talk about that in some of the other segments, but it's also a moral story. And even if you strip the story entirely from the Jewish historical religious context, you're witnessing a depraved, decadent society. And that decadence and that ugliness and that horrific moral decay and moral rot is on display in these parties. And these parties are problematic because they're exploitative. They're exploitative sexually. They take advantage of women. It's pretty clear. They take advantage of Vashti. Pretty clear what Achashverosh's intentions are. Pretty clear how he conducts what was nothing more than a celebrated pornographic celebration or pornographic contest to see who can appease and who can stimulate the king's sexual desires best. Basically, it's prostitution. It's institutionalized prostitution. It's horrible to think about. We've seen so many over the last couple of years. I'm recording these files now, this year now, as some of the files of some of the ways that women were exploited and abused by wealthy people, and it's just horrific to just associate the two. But it's exploitative also financially, because while the people in Shushan are rollicking and frolicking for 180 days, of course, who's fitting the bill? Who's paying for the bill? Who's ordering all the food? The people in the countryside are being taxed through their nose, and their cattle are being taken, and their monies are being taken, and there's a very heavy taxation. There's an undercurrent of taxation and of financial abuse and of financial pressure throughout Megillat Esther. According to one day in the Gemara, I forget whether it's Rav or Shmuel, he was called Achashverosh, Shakol Nasin, Russian Biyamav. Everyone became poor because they were fleeced, because they were taxed through the nose, because someone had to foot the bill that everyone in Shushan could party. And you're seeing, by the way, multi-generational wealth building up and the consequences of that build-up of multi-generational wealth. If you go back a couple hundred years, let's place the Purim episode in the 6th or 5th century, I think it's 5th century, so BCE, of course. If you go back a couple hundred years, you're talking about the rise of the first multi-regional empires, the rise of Assyria, and then Assyria was conquered by Babylonia, and Babylonia was conquered by Persia, Media, Persia, and Parsimadi. And when you have these large multi-regional empires, they have sacked, S-A-C-K-E-D, they have ransacked wealth from all the tribes that they conquer. So for the first time in history, probably since Mitzrayim, when Mitzrayim reached unimaginable wealth, exaggerated wealth because of their role during the famine, you have condensed wealth being passed on from generation to generation, being taken from one empire, being delivered to the conquering empire, and it all settles in Parasamadai, and you're seeing the consequences of wealth. It becomes hedonism, it becomes sexual depravity, it becomes financial persecution, and also becomes exhibitionism. It's not only the color of green or the color of money that becomes universal, it's also very, very exhibitionist. We're spending 180 days in the open courtyard, the open veranda, eating, gorging, regurgitating, walking back in for more food, for more women, for more wine, on public display, basically one long reality show. And it's interesting because Shushan really is presented as a very democratic and pluralistic society. The yain chadas ein ones, the kelim shonim, ishki ishkir tzanav, ishki l'shon beiso. So it really is a multicultural environment because it condensed or it encompassed 127 provinces. And of course, when you have multiculturalism, so no value rises to the top. The only values that are universal are hedonism, financial pursuit, exhibitionism, voyeurism. It's really an ugly place to live. I mean, you read the first two prakim, you become sick in your stomach. There's not a place that a good Jew should be. And that's, of course, in Megillah, Daf Yudalid, that Rav Shimon bar Yochai's Talmidim asked him why the Jews were punished with the threat of extinction, the threat of genocide, extinction, annihilation. And he told his Talmidim, why don't you answer? And they came up with this answer, because Shenenu Misudas Achashverosh. And of course, the food was kosher, as Chazal tell us, V'yain chadas ein ones, kadas shel halacha, and the food was glad kosher, but not the place for a Jew to be. It's really not the place for any Jew in Shushan to find themselves. And into this rotten, rancid, smelly world walks two people. And there are each two people whose names Chazal associate with fragrance. Mordechai, Mardirar, they associate Mordechai with the first of the spices, is Mardirar in the list in Parshas Kitisa. So there's a spice and a fragrance and an aroma association. And of course, Hadassah Esther. Hadassah is a very aromatic plant. And it's because they're basically air freshener for this disgusting, rotting, smelling, reeking society of moral decay. And they have to breathe fresh air. And the Chazal are replete with these imageries that when the tzaddik rises, then nechama and joy and tranquility comes to the world. Namely, Mordechai and Esther are not just saving Jewish history. Mordechai and Esther are repairing broken, ruptured, fallen cultures. And that's the contrast of the parties. The first five parties are either hedonistic or genocidal. They're either celebrating food, celebrating money, celebrating wealth, celebrating pornography, or celebrating genocide. They were all around horrible, horrible agendas. And the last parties are all purpose-driven. The last parties all have a purpose, celebrating life, the restoration of life, the protection of life, uncovering Haman's agenda and conspiracy through the first two parties. And Mordechai and Esther breathe fresh moral spirit into a fallen moral world. And when Esther is appointed queen, Hanachala Medina Osasa, Achashverosh relieves some of the tax burden from the countryside. And Esther's parties are not in the Chatzar Ginas Bisan HaMelech. They're inside the Beis HaMelech. How do I know that? Because the second party, when Haman gets frightened, so Achashverosh runs out into the Chatzar Ginas Bisan HaMelech, and Haman is still inside the house with Esther, and he falls on the bed, and Achashverosh comes in and suspects him of adultery, and it all goes south for Haman afterwards. Because if you're going to have a party, it should be understated, it should be quiet, it should be purpose-driven, it shouldn't be lavish, it shouldn't be ostentatious, it shouldn't be exhibitionist. So the parties are the symbol that carry this message. It's a message beyond parties. It's about moral presence. It's about living with wealth. I think as a community, we don't have a masora about how to live as wealthy people. We have been poor most of our history, certainly the last 2,000 years. There's an accumulated memory, collective accumulated memory of living poor and living with modest means and trying to get by. And there's from that talk about that heighten the value of living in Pasuk Melech Tocha, Mistapek Bechelko, giving tzedakah. There's a whole framework of thought about how to be poor. Do we have that same framework about how to be wealthy? Of course we don't, because we never were wealthy. So you have messaging here and there, Al Tiraki, Ashirishki, Bekavod Besok, but they're not as resonant because we didn't live with them. They don't appear as much in all the shiurim that we read and the sermons that were given and the Musar shmuzas that we've heard, because they just weren't relevant, so they weren't resonant. They don't echo throughout our history. I think we have to start facing some of those questions. How do we live with wealth? How do we build houses? What types of cars do we drive? And it can't just settle into how much tzedakah we give or how much mostos we support. It can't just be that. It has to be, are we understated or loud? Are we quiet or are we ostentatious? And by the way, Israel's catching up. You go back 20 years, this was a message for the people in the United States of America and England who lived in the lap of luxury. But we're cycling towards a new era in the state of Israel, an era of wealth. And I think we have started asking those questions also. Again, the terms are different. But again, Megillat Esther is not just about wealth. It's about a society that has lost its moral compass, lost its moral direction, falling into the celebration of wealth, celebration of the body, the celebration of exploitation of women, taxing people beyond their means, forcing people into financial stress. And that's why Purim alone is the yontif we celebrate, the Mishnah of Simcha. We'll do it right. The Mishnah of Simcha, we'll try to dig deeper into ourselves, uncover something that we sometimes are precluded from understanding about ourselves, more achvos and reyos, giving money to other people, giving food to other people, matanos levyonim, mishlach monos l'shreyo, sharing our meals, because Esther and Mordechai got it right. And the parties are the literary device to show and to demonstrate, to illustrate Mordechai and Esther walking into this morally fallen world and spraying some air freshener, both Mordechai, Mordoror, and Hadassah, the Esther. Purim Sameach, this is the end of part 1. See you for part 2.